You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 7th of January 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead...
I care deeply about this country, and I will always be motivated by what is in the best interest of Canadians.
Justin Trudeau has resigned as Canadian Prime Minister and prorogued Parliament. We'll hear from our man in Toronto. As Ukraine pushes further into Russia's Kursk region, we'll ask who has the upper hand militarily. We'll cross to Seoul for the latest in the political drama which has been gripping the country since the president's brief imposition of martial law. Plus,
we run something like 75 sales per year, so that means that we are changing and exhibiting new stuff every 3 to 4 days with a very small number of days to install and disinstall the exhibitions.
We'll have the inside track from Sotheby's in Paris, and we'll hear how Syria is working towards welcoming back international tourists. With a look through the front pages and a roundup of design news, we'll end the show in Amsterdam, where a new smart traffic light system has been given the red light. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. US President Joe Biden's decision to block Nippon Steel's $14.9 billion bid for US steel cast a shadow over Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to Japan today for farewell meetings with Washington's most important ally in Asia. Indonesia will formally join BRICS as a full member, Brazil's government said on Monday, further expanding the group of major emerging economies that also includes Russia, India, China and South Africa. And the US Congress formally certified Republican President-elect Donald Trump's election victory on Monday during a session presided over by Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris, who lost the November contest. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, after more than 9 years as Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau announced his resignation in Ottawa yesterday.
Every morning I've woken up as Prime Minister. I've been inspired by the resilience, the generosity, and the determination of Canadians. It is the driving force of every single day I have the privilege of serving in this office. That is why, since 2015, I've fought for this country, for you.
But that fight will now pass to someone else, as the process to succeed him as leader of Canada's Liberal Party and as Prime Minister gets underway. Monocle's correspondent in Toronto, Thomas Lewis, assesses the outgoing Prime Minister's time in office and begins by taking us back to election night in Canada in October 2015.
On election night in Canada back in 2015, Justin Trudeau took to the stage at his victorious party's election night rally and declared that sunny ways, my friends, sunny ways lay ahead for the country that had just voted in Canada's centre-left Liberal Party in a landslide. This, he went on, is what positive politics can do. And at the beginning, Trudeau's personable approach to leadership was undeniably refreshing. It indeed felt as though the curtains had been thrown open to let the daylight back in. Vows to boost immigration, to diversify and grow the national economy, and to reassert Canada's role in the world, all policies that were cheered on at the time, fuelled that upswing both in the national mood and in how others viewed the country from afar. Trudeau's own obvious enjoyment of the spotlight, no doubt honed by his previous career as a high school drama teacher, was also put to use in a variety of ways. He movingly greeted in person the first groups of refugees of Syria's civil war as they arrived at Toronto's International Airport in late 2015. And he also posed for the cameras cuddling a pair of pandas at Canada's National Zoo for good measure. But imagery in politics is a precarious thing to rely on, particularly when a government's image has been intertwined so tightly with that of its leader. When convoys of long-haul truckers blockaded the capital city, Ottawa, back in 2021 to demonstrate against Canada's COVID-19 vaccine mandates, it was Trudeau's name, more than the policy itself, that fueled their ire. Frustratingly, the debate over Trudeau's future as Prime Minister has clouded a slew of profound issues currently at play in the country. Record inflation, an acute squeeze on housing, stubbornly high prices for daily necessities, as well as an incoming tariff-happy US administration that has Canada already in its sights, and a deeply troubling investigation into widespread foreign meddling by India, China and Iran among them in Canada's national life. The ascent of populist politics on the right in Canada adds to the uncharted territory ahead. Whoever enters the Prime Minister's office next in Ottawa should work to ensure that Canada's gaze doesn't turn inward and find a way to let the sunlight back in. For Monocle, I'm Thomas Lewis.
For further coverage, stay tuned for our paper review and listen to today's edition of The Briefing at midday London time. This is The Globalist. Ukraine has launched a new offensive in Kursk. This follows the initial push in August when Ukrainian troops seized a swathe of territory just over the border within Russia proper, including the town of Sudza, at the time home to a crucial pipeline providing Europe with Russian gas. But despite Ukraine's initial success, the Russians have been slowly gaining back ground, reportedly bolstered by 12,000 reinforcements from their ally, North Korea. Well, I'm joined now by Jenny Mathers, who's a senior lecturer in international politics at Aberystwyth University. Jenny, thanks for coming on the show. What's happened since the original incursion on August the 6th?
So since August, the Ukrainians initially had quite a bit of success and expanded the area that they initially took control over. And then gradually, I think as Russia was able to recover from its surprise and organize some forces, including, as we know, as you said, North Korean forces, to push them back, there's been a slow process of reversal. And so the Ukrainians have lost perhaps about half of the ground that they originally took in the incursion in the summer. They're still holding ground, but they've been sort of beaten back. And so this latest counteroffensive by the Ukrainians has really given perhaps new life to their summer offensive and given them the hope possibly of retaking some of that ground or indeed just putting Russia on the back foot.
And how has Russia retaliated?
Well, so far they've been mixed reports. Basically, Russia has claimed that it has pushed back the Ukrainian forces. It's sufficiently murky at the moment that we don't know exactly what has happened where. But what we've seen in the past is definitely that Russia takes a bit of time to recover from these kinds of surprises that Ukraine likes to initiate. And so it seems unlikely that the Russians will have been able to recover and push back immediately. So we suspect Ukraine has gained some ground, but we don't know quite how much it is yet.
Russia, however, does say that it's captured a key stronghold on the Eastern Front.
Yes, that's right. So Russia has been pushing, very slowly but surely further into eastern Ukraine over the past year, really, throughout 2024. And they've been inching towards a city called Pokrovsk, which is a key logistical hub for the Ukrainians. And they claim now to have taken a town on the way to Pokrovsk, about 20 miles south of it. And so they seem to be taking, further steps towards taking that important logistical hub.
So where would you say the balance of power lies now?
Well, I think both countries are struggling. Both Ukraine and Russia are struggling to recruit and train and equip and deploy enough forces to continue to fight this war in the way that they've been fighting it, which is very labor intensive. Both countries are struggling with equipment and ammunition supplies. Both countries are relying upon foreign allies to support them. So I think it really depends on where you're looking. Now, clearly, Ukraine, in many respects, is on the back foot because a substantial proportion of their territory is under occupation, and they are trying to sort of evict the invaders. Russia seems to have taken a slightly more relaxed attitude towards the invasion of its own territory, strangely enough, and so they have not been in a great rush to evict the Ukrainians. So I think it very much depends on where you're looking in terms of this balance. I think there are advantages and disadvantages on both sides.
Do you think that Zelensky and Putin are counting on Trump's inauguration changing the narrative? I mean, we know that Zelensky's implied that Kursk might be a useful bargaining tool, but he clearly expects the US to lead ceasefire talks later this year.
Well, I think everybody is expecting a second Trump administration to shake things up somehow in this war, because the Biden administration got into a very clear kind of practice of providing drip feed support to the Ukrainians in terms of weapons, ammunition, financial support, and so on, without really a clear sense of what the end game was. We'll support Ukraine as long as it takes was the phrase that we often heard from Biden administration officials. Trump has indicated he wants a change of pace. He wants the war brought to an end, or at least a ceasefire, very quickly. And so everyone is expecting something different to happen, but no one is quite sure exactly what that will be, because, of course, Trump is quite volatile and unpredictable. So I think both Ukrainians and the Russians have got both hopes and anxieties around what happens after the 20th of January.
And so, Jenny, in terms of other recent Russian gains, what are we seeing?
So I think we're seeing, again, this sort of slow, steady progress. I think what's noticeable is that the Russians have not managed during the course of 2024 to take any cities in Ukraine. They've managed to take control of small towns and villages, usually after bombarding them and leaving effectively lots of rubble, leaving them uninhabitable effectively. So that has been a feature, really, of Russia's ongoing move. There've been continuing issues with, Russian ill treatment of POWs, and continuing the whole issue of Russia taking Ukrainian children away from Ukraine back to Russia to adopt them into Russian families. So these kinds of trends and practices, which we've seen almost from the beginning of the mass invasion, have really just continued throughout 2024.
And is there any more clarity about the use of North Korean troops in the areas?
So I think what we've seen, and the reports indicate that so far the North Korean troops are a relatively small number. I mean, sort of maybe 10, 12, 15,000 at the most. Not a huge number in terms of the overall scale of this war, but that they've been deployed in Russia to fight against Ukrainian forces in the Kursk region to try and retake Russian territory for Russia. So as far as we can tell, they have not been deployed in Ukraine itself. And that's interesting because it does suggest that perhaps Russian military leaders are not quite as confident of the capabilities of the North Koreans. And certainly we've got lots of reports coming from Ukrainian sources that suggest that the North Koreans are, really quite ineffective in terms of their ability to, survive battle conditions. They're not as savvy as the Russian forces are. And so, it suggests that they're being used to prop up, Russia's forces, but they're maybe not going to be a significant advantage, at least at this point.
Jenny, thank you very much indeed. That's Jenny Mathers there, a senior lecturer in international politics. This is The Globalist. It is 16:14 in Seoul, 7:14 here in London. Impeached South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol avoided arrest ahead of last night's deadline after an anti-graft investigators asked for more time to enforce a warrant. He's defiantly refused questioning 3 times over a bungled martial law decree last month and remained holed up in his residence, surrounded by hundreds of guards, preventing his arrest. Well, this comes as visiting US Secretary of State Antony Blinken reaffirmed reaffirmed confidence in the key Asian allies' handling of the political turmoil. For more, I'm joined by Stephen Borovich, who is Nikkei Asia's staff writer and an editor in Seoul. Steve, thanks for coming on the show. This is an extraordinary situation, and there's no precedent for arresting an incumbent president. I wonder if you could run us through what's happened since the first attempt to arrest Yoon on Friday night.
Well, there's been this really quite dramatic sort of standoff outside of Yoon's residence in Seoul, where there were hundreds of people who converged on the scene because they felt like the effort to arrest Yoon was unfair, and they wanted to physically block these investigators from being able to get to his residence to serve this warrant. Yoon, even though he's been impeached, he's still technically the sitting president, so he also still has his security detail, and the investigators called off their efforts to arrest him because they said that they had entered into a confrontation with his security staff that they felt risked the safety of the investigators. So since then, we've just heard more and more kind of defiant remarks from his side of the political spectrum. And there's, at this point, there's no real certainty as to what's going to happen in the near future.
Has the arrest warrant been extended?
They've applied for an extension. I don't believe there's been a public statement on whether or not that's been granted, but that seems to be the direction.
And who's handling the arrest? Because it seems like the police and the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials, or the CIO, keeps batting responsibility between them.
Well, the CIO is technically in charge. What they've asked is for the police's support in going in and actually serving this warrant, because these are investigators. They're not armed and they're not trained in the kinds of confrontation that seems to be happening here. One kind of nugget of context that can get lost when we talk about the CIO is this was something that was created under the previous administration, which was a left-wing administration. Yoon Suk-yeol is from the right side of the political spectrum, and the reason that they created it was because they wanted the liberal side kind of wanted their own investigative body that they could use to go after allegations of corruption as an alternative to the prosecution service, which is a traditionally very right-wing organization. And Yoon himself is a former prosecutor, so there's all these kinds of layers to the antagonism here.
What is US Secretary of State Antony Blinken doing there, and what's he said about the crisis?
Well, Secretary Blinken is on a kind of big world tour, his last big trip through Asia during his term. And while he's here, he said the kinds of predictable things that U.S. officials always say when they come here, which is that they reaffirm the alliance. The alliance is ironclad and all the rest. Blinken said that he has faith that the South Korean government will be able to effectively manage the situation. You can understand why he doesn't want to say too much about it, because he's on his way out and nobody really knows who the next South Korean administration will be. But it's important to keep in mind that the U.S.-South Korea alliance has pretty strong, not uniform, but pretty strong bipartisan support in both Seoul and in Washington. So I don't think relations with the U.S. are at any real kind of risk.
And finally, we're told that Yoon Suk-yeol's popularity amongst the population has reportedly risen. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. It is interesting, though. I mean, the polls are not giving us Yoon's approval rating anymore because he's suspended as president. But the polls do show that the support for his party, the ruling People Power Party, has inched up. And there's another poll that showed that there's been an increase in the number of people who don't feel like he should be removed from office. We can only speculate as to why that is, but it seems like his efforts to kind of cast himself as a victim and to claim that the opposition is taking the country on this destructive path and that he needs to remain in office to protect democracy and to protect stability. It's still a minority view. I think it's still something close to 70% of respondents to surveys say that they think he should be impeached, but it does seem to be inching up. Whether or not that will be a decisive difference or not is another question, but that is one interesting wrinkle to the crisis here.
Steve Borovich, thank you very much indeed. Now, still to come on the programme.
It's both commercially significant and symbolic. Turkey and Qatar are the two countries which consistently backed the Syrian opposition, and particularly the parts of the Syrian opposition which in the end unseated Bashar al-Assad.
More on Syria a little later in the programme. This is The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Let's continue now with today's newspapers, and joining me in the studio is Terry Stiastany, a political journalist and author. Good morning to you, Terry.
Good morning.
Let's start with Trudeau, because, of course, they're making the front pages everywhere. He's resigning, he's prorogued Parliament. The FT has a look back at his career.
Yes, it's interesting. I mean, as you say, look at most of the front pages, certainly in the UK today, there's a rather sort of tearful-looking Justin Trudeau announcing his decision to step down. But the FT kind of takes us back to happier times, and it says, praised abroad, troubled at home, Canada's political prince bows out. And they've got much happier images of Justin Trudeau, and they're sort of casting us back to when he took office, and he sort of said, sunny ways, my friend, sunny ways. Apparently that was his sort of introductory remarks. But of course, looking back at him as, calling him this political prince, because of course he was the son of Pierre Trudeau, the famous Canadian Prime Minister of the 70s, and just really looking at how this came to the situation where he has effectively had to stand down. Say that he was always, according to the FT, his record was sort of deeply mixed, the popular view of him deeply mixed, that although people like this kind of sunny, progressive, forward-looking view, the Conservatives didn't really like what he was doing. They were sceptical about him. They were worried particularly about his views on climate change and the oil industry and issues like that. So they're looking back, talking about his charisma, his progressive image, but saying that this reputation had been undermined, one expert said, by what they call perceived hypocrisy. And also an interesting thing is who is going to succeed him. I see, a name that's very familiar in the UK, of course, is Mark Carney, who's the former governor of the Bank of England, as well as the governor of the Bank of Canada. He's now said he might try to get into politics, might try to become leader. And of course, Chrystia Freeland, who resigned just before Christmas and said, she didn't think that Trudeau was tackling Trump in the right way. Now, she's also seen as potentially another future leader. But the question is, how will the party do if they have another election? It looks quite likely that the Liberal Party are most likely to lose, really.
Let's come to Europe now. Emmanuel Macron is just the latest person to be ticked off by the world's richest man, Elon Musk.
Yes. Well, I mean, this is quite interesting. I would be interested to know if there's a bit of a discussion going on behind the scenes between European leaders as to how they respond to Elon Musk's criticism, because it's not only Emmanuel Macron who was giving his traditional speech to French diplomats yesterday. He said, who could have imagined 10 years ago that the owner of one of the world's largest social networks would be supporting a new international reactionary movement and intervening directly in elections, including in Germany. The Prime Minister of Norway has also been critical. The German government spokespeople have said, we don't think normal people and sensible people are a big majority in the country, and we don't think his statements can influence Germany. We act as if they can influence us. This is simply not the case. And also, the Times reporting this morning, if you saw Keir Starmer's speech yesterday, he was supposed to be talking mostly about healthcare and about reforming the NHS in the UK. And he had quite a well-prepared response to Elon Musk, who's been incredibly critical, not only of staff Starmer, who's been calling evil, but also of British government ministers, accusing them of failing to act on grooming gangs and on child abuse, when in fact there have been loads of action and there have been loads of inquiries into what's gone on. But Keir Starmer saying there are people spreading lies and misinformation as far and as wide as possible. They're not interested in victims. They're interested in themselves. So, a lot of interesting responses from European leaders.
Yeah, and just extraordinary that this man should just spend his time basically trolling Europe.
Yeah, it is amazing. And it's amazing sort of the level to which he is carrying on doing this. I mean, over the last couple of days, he has attacked former British Prime Minister Gordon Brown. I mean, he's even attacked Ed Davey, the Liberal leader of the Liberal Democrats. I mean, he's getting quite, into the weeds here, but just sort of completely misunderstanding, I think, everything. We've seen him talk about the Reform Party having met Nigel Farage in Mar-a-Lago and suggesting that he was going to make a huge donation to the Reform Party. Then over the weekend, he decided that he didn't like Nigel Farage anymore and that he wasn't going to support him as the leader of the Reform Party and was going to support somebody else instead. I mean, he doesn't let up, and it's just, fascinating to know what exactly is going on in his head.
Absolutely. Now, France is marking 10 years since the Charlie Hebdo affair. Le Figaro's looking at this.
Yes, this obviously is going to be a big day. There's going to be a lot of commemoration in France about not only the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, which took place 10 years ago, but also the attack on Hypercacher, which was the Jewish supermarket in France. And actually they have Le Figaro has been looking at what people think about this in France 10 years on. And basically, although people still fundamentally say, a huge proportion, 76% of people in a survey say freedom of expression is a fundamental right, and the freedom to caricature, which is what, of course, Charlie Hebdo had done, is a part of that. But there does seem to be a bit more, perhaps not surprisingly, among the younger generation, perhaps people who don't remember this quite as well. Younger people are a bit more concerned about having limits on freedom of expression. Perhaps 46% of young people said they would have been shocked by the kind of cartoons that Charlie Hebdo had been publishing at that time. And it says, they still think this spirit of, do you remember, people saying "Je suis Charlie" after the attacks on that does persist. But, perhaps inevitably with time it is fading out a bit. And I think, although some young people are saying, in France, this was like the September 11th, this was like 9/11 for my generation, they are trying to remind people that, the importance of combating terrorism and the importance of also having freedom of expression within France as well.
Finally, let's have a look at something which would seem like a minor story, but it's really, really not. It's got such deep implications. This is the Danish king changing the coat of arms.
Yes, well, we're talking about, ways that countries have been responding to, the comments of Donald Trump and of Elon Musk. And Denmark seems to have got its heralds onto this one. So the new king, King Frederik, who succeeded his mother, the Queen Margrethe, less than a year ago, and he has decided to change the country's coat of arms. And as some people are seeing this, The Guardian is reporting, as perhaps a response to Donald Trump saying that he would like the US to buy Greenland and the Faroe Islands. And so if you look at the two coats of arms here, what they've done is put the symbols of Greenland and the Faroe Islands, which is a polar bear and a ram, much more prominently on the new coat of arms, and they have removed the three crowns, which were apparently the symbol of the union between Denmark, Norway and Sweden. And so some people are reading this not just as a sort of a question of modernisation, but a question of saying, no, look, the Faroe Islands and Greenland, we belong together. And the king, in his New Year speech, is saying, we are all united, committed for the Kingdom of Denmark, from the Danish minority in South Schleswig to all the way to Greenland. We belong together, even though, pointing out, Schleswig is outside of the kingdom. So I can't imagine that they only redesigned the coat of arms as a response, but it certainly seems to be wanting to make a point there.
But I mean, Donald Trump Jr. is actually in Greenland today.
Yes. I mean, so, he said he's expected to visit Greenland on Tuesday. It's a private visit. Apparently he's recording a podcast and not actually, we don't think, planting a flag or doing anything like that. Donald Trump Sr. saying Greenland is an incredible place. The people will benefit benefit tremendously if and when it becomes part of our nation. Make Greenland great again. So, yeah, it does still seem to be carrying on with this, coat of arms or no coat of arms.
Man alive, everybody thinks they can do a podcast, don't they? Terry, thank you very much indeed. That's Terry Stiastany there. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. US President Joe Biden's decision to block Nippon Steel's $14.9 billion bid for US steel cast a shadow over Secretary of State Antony Blinken's visit to Japan today for farewell meetings with Washington's most important ally in Asia. The rejection, announced on Friday, has jolted US efforts to boost ties with Asian allies, just as South Korea's political crisis potentially complicates a revived relationship between Washington, Seoul and Tokyo. The trilateral alliance is a key plank in the country's efforts to counter China's military build-up. Indonesia will formally join BRICS as a full member, Brazil's government said on Monday, further expanding the group of major emerging economies that also includes Russia, India, China and South Africa. Indonesia, the world's fourth most populous nation, had previously expressed its desire to join the group as a means of strengthening emerging countries and furthering the interests of the so-called Global South. And the US Congress formally certified Republican President-elect Donald Trump's election victory on Monday during a session presided over by Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris, who lost the November contest. The quadrennial ritual clearing the way for Trump's inauguration in 2 weeks went like clockwork and stood in sharp contrast to 4 years ago when a mob of Trump supporters stormed the Capitol in a failed bid to block the certification of then-President Trump's 2020 loss to Democratic President Joe Biden. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. The auction house Sotheby's has opened its new Parisian headquarters. The 5-storey building was designed to break with the aura of secrecy often associated with auctions. Monocle's Simon Bouvier visited the site with Sotheby's France Director General Marie-Anne Ginot and architect Gaspard Joly as construction workers were putting the finishing touches on the space. He started by asking why it was so important to relocate to the heart of Paris.
83 Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré is at the corner of Avenue Matignon and Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré. And the fact that we are placed in a corner is already a big change for us and a great opportunity for a greater visibility and a greater access to the client and anyone who wants to go through the doors of Sotheby's. And from this beginning, then we had a very good discussion and a dialogue with Architecture Studio, because this corner building presents something like 70 meters, I think, of windows on the street. So that allows us not only to show what's happening inside the auction room, but also what's on sale, let's say, in the vitrine. And we are used in Sotheby's to be very flexible to what we need to do. And in this building, this is also what we wanted to do, but in a greater space, more, again, open in terms of circulation, going from the second floor to the first floor to the second floor without any disruption, and discovering new items all around the corner every time you cross one corridor.
We were also talking about the kind of diversity of the spaces here, and apart from the auction room floor, what other types of activities and spaces you have planned here that are not typical for an auction house. Can you explain what these are and what the idea is behind them?
Going back to the strategic idea for Sotheby's is really to adapt an auction building to auctions in 2024 and onwards, which is different from auction that used to be run in the previous years, and especially now that we are doing more and more online sales, we are engaging with many more new clients. Something like 30 to 40% of our clients are newcomers, especially in luxury. So we still want to attract our clients to a physical experience in the space, but it's different from what we used to do 10 years ago. So it means offering new experience like wine tasting, master classes, exhibition, non-selling exhibition, discussions, just like a cultural new place.
And you even have a cafe planned.
And right? We even have a cafe indeed, because it's, again, after COVID, and even though it's very much online sales, even more, we want people to engage, contact, and here is the place where our clients can discuss with the specialists, because one of the most added value of auction is the specialists who know so much and can share their passion with the clients. So the cafe purpose is really that, share the passion around a coffee. We're in Paris, un petit café le matin, all together.
Perfect. And Gaspard, how are you thinking about designing these different spaces for these very different purposes?
In fact, it is really a mixed-use building. This building has a very big density of spaces connected all together. And we have thought about our first thinking was to think about the promenade we can have into the building, since you cross the door at the entrance, at the angle of the building, and then you're welcome in the building, and you go from the angle and from the entrance into the main gallery, ground floor, and the auction room. The brief, we could say also that it was 3 words. One is optimization. It means that you need to offer the maximum surface areas for exhibition on the walls or within the floors. Optimization. Then flexibility. Flexibility, it means that you have to transform all the spaces in exhibition places. It means that even the 3rd floor here, which is dedicated for the offices now, if Sotheby's decided, we already have all the lighting issues and features for exhibition, and we have the walls for it, and if we need, we can make it an exhibition spaces as well. And then connectivity as well.
I think, like Gaspard said, connectivity is a must. I mean, with the online sales. So today, when you go to an auction room, whether you bid in the room or on the phone or behind your screen, so this has to work perfectly and with no time lapse. So this is the key. And then I think what's very, very important too is a very agile building. Like you can change from one day to the other in a very smooth way. We run something like 75 sales per year. So that means that we are changing and exhibiting new stuff every 3 to 4 days with a very small number of days to install and disinstall the exhibition. So this agility is key, and it has an influence on all the space and all whether the technical space or even, of course, the public space.
Could you share with us what the inaugural auction will be for the grand opening?
Yes. So we'll be opening with 2 main auctions that will be exhibited, that are modernité and surrealism. So those are 2 very important moments around modern art and contemporary art. Surrealism especially because you know that it's the anniversary of the surrealism movement. But we'll be also exhibiting some private sales that we were discussing previously with very famous art, contemporary art in our current building in the 76 Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, because we are so enthusiastic, let's say, about this opening that we will be running the 2 spaces during the week of the opening. And at the 1st floor, we will be exhibiting a non-selling exhibition with a few items which each represent a department of expertise in our house. So we'll have like the most exquisite furniture, the most exquisite handbag. So it will be really like a demonstration of what the French savoir-faire can be. So it's named Excellence à la Française. Really in the idea of sharing passion. It's not only about transacting, it's also about sharing passion.
Marie-Anne Ginot there, speaking to Monocle's Simon Bouvier. This is Monocle Radio. Major airlines have begun operating commercial flights in and out of Damascus airport today, after they were suspended for the 13 years of civil war. The now toppled regime of Bashar al-Assad left the economy and the basic infrastructure of Syria in ruins, but this could signal the start of a new chapter. Hannah Lucinda Smith, Monocle's Istanbul correspondent, joins me now. Hannah, how significant a development is the return of Qatar and Turkish Airways to Damascus Airport?
Yeah, I think it's both commercially significant and symbolic. Turkey and Qatar are the two countries which consistently backed the Syrian opposition, and particularly the parts of the Syrian opposition which in the end unseated Bashar al-Assad on December the 8th, even as other countries which had initially supported the opposition back in 2012, 2013 kind of dropped away. So countries like the UK, the US, got increasingly nervous about the opposition as parts of it got radicalised. But Turkey and Qatar really stuck with those factions. And now, of course, are the two countries which have the sort of strongest political influence, and are the two countries which are poised now to really take some of the commercial benefits from the rebuilding of the country as well.
Will there be anybody on these flights? I mean, is it aimed at Syrians in the diaspora returning home, or in the hope of redeveloping tourism?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly when we come to Turkey, definitely Syrians in the diaspora. Of course, Turkey is the biggest host of Syrian refugees in the world. There's about 3.6 million Syrians here in Turkey, according to official figures. Now, in Qatar, not such a big refugee population at all, but certainly in terms of commercial interests, we're going to see, I think, a lot of Qatari constructors, business people coming into Syria to help with that reconstruction. But also from Turkey as well. Already we're seeing Turkish construction companies signing up to go to construction fairs that are being organised in Damascus for the spring. In fact, when Bashar al-Assad fled the country on December the 8th, one of the really interesting things that happened here in Turkey was that a lot of construction companies, their share price soared on the Istanbul Stock Exchange, which is really a sign of, how good it is for them. Also, Turkey's energy ministry said last week that they are ready to run Syria's electricity, the whole of the country. Already parts of the north, the areas that were controlled by these rebel groups for many years, already Turkey had taken over the kind of responsibility for providing electricity there. But also it looks like it's going to do it now for the whole country. So I think it's a bit of both. But certainly here in Turkey, there are a lot of people probably not ready to go back straight away. They're looking to weigh up how things go politically. And also, many of those people at the moment don't have homes to return to. There's a lot of destruction in Syria. But I think they are sort of eyeing up when and how they can return.
And I wonder if you can give us some idea of how far Syria has to go before it is fully open for business. I mean, what has the effect of the last 13 years been on the country in terms of the infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to kind of explain the scale of the destruction in Syria. We're talking about a country which has been completely torn apart, both in terms of its society and also in terms of its infrastructure. Cities like Aleppo, where there was this years-long struggle between the opposition armed factions and Bashar al-Assad's army, there are whole neighbourhoods, whole swathes of the city that were destroyed and were never reconstructed. The reconstruction in Aleppo that happened after 2016 when Assad's forces regained control, that was focused on the kind of old city, the historic parts, the tourist attractions, but the neighbourhoods that the rebels had occupied for many years and were really badly destroyed, they were just kind of left as they were. The same in cities like Homs, the same in suburbs of Damascus. That's a mix of both, Syria not having the capacity itself to rebuild, but also not particularly wanting those people who had lived in those neighbourhoods and then fled to come back. It was almost sort of left as a bit of a warning to other people. Now, there had been some investment in Syria, some foreign investment during the past 12, 13 years, but it had come from countries that had stuck by Assad. So countries like Iran, Russia, China. Obviously what Western companies could do was limited to the point of not being able to do anything at all thanks to US sanctions. So what companies are waiting for now, and also what the Syrian government is waiting for, is what the US is going to do with those sanctions. Obviously the new government in Syria wants those sanctions lifted as quickly as possible so that Western companies can come back, so that aid can come back, investment can come back. But I think, countries like the US and the UK are really watching this new government very, very carefully. Clearly the background of the group that took control of Damascus, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, they used to be Al-Qaeda's affiliate in Syria. They've made some moves to distance themselves from Al-Qaeda. from kind of radical Islamism. But already there are some signs that are kind of worrying observers, the kind of people who they're appointing to the government, kind of early decisions that are being made.
And how much of an image problem do you think Damascus has? I mean, beyond the lifting of sanctions, how can it be returned as an appealing destination for international business and for tourists?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously the first problem, as I just mentioned, is, can this new government really totally free itself from its past? One of the things that happened in the past week was the new Justice Minister, who's been appointed, pretty quickly some videos emerged showing him in 2015 overseeing the kind of meting out of the death penalty to women in Idlib province, which was under this group's control then for adultery and for prostitution. So really kind of harsh Sharia law, the kind of thing that's going to really make the US government and also make investors kind of, maybe think twice. But also, this is a country that for 13 years has really been kind of cut off from the world. Even before the war, it was a really closed country. It was just starting to attract kind of really adventurous tourists who are going to places like Palmyra, this amazing ancient city in the desert, going to see places like Aleppo and Damascus. Unfortunately, over the past decade, it's just become an absolute byword for war, for terrorism, for extremism, for all things that kind of put investors and tourists off. And on top of that, Palmyra, that was famously and tragically destroyed in large part by ISIS when it controlled that area. Large parts of the Aleppo souk were destroyed and have been reconstructed, but still large amounts of destruction everywhere. So I think it's going to take a really, really long time.
And would you say that there is a sense of optimism then in the country?
I think there is a sense of optimism. I mean, it's sort of, the fall of Assad was so unexpected and came after such a long time when so many people had suffered. Just thinking about the toll that this war has taken, we're talking about between 500,000 and 1 million people killed, more than half of the country displaced, about 7 million people outside of Syria. That's out of a population of about 21 million. This scale of the suffering was huge. And, although all the armed factions played a part in that, really, the biggest player in that was Bashar al-Assad and his regime. So, I think the fact that he's gone, and we saw, in the immediate aftermath of that, and also in the New Year's celebrations in Damascus, absolute joy and real relief about that. And I think that's something that, we shouldn't take away from Syrians. But, I do also think, there is a sense that this is going to be a really, really difficult rebuilding process. And also not only amongst, international observers, also amongst many Syrians themselves, including, the Syrians who were the ones who started those protests back in 2011. Let's not forget, back in 2011, it was students, it was educated, middle-class people who first took to the streets against Bashar al-Assad. And they saw what they did, being completely co-opted, kind of kidnapped by these radical groups. And now they have to kind of come to terms with the fact that in the end, okay, Assad is gone, but it is these radical rooted groups that did the kind of heavy lifting on that. And already, if you look at the conversations between those Syrians who are part of the original revolutionary movement, there's already some concern about the kind of direction that this new government might take.
Thank you very much to Hannah Lucinda-Smith, Monocle's Istanbul correspondent. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
Last year, Amsterdam made a grand announcement about the use of intelligent traffic lights. The Dutch capital, which suffers from congestion, piloted 2 schemes designed to track vehicles and monitor traffic flows. But now the rollout of the smart lights has been abruptly cancelled. Stefan de Vries, who is European Affairs correspondent at Euronews and BNR News Radio, is based in Amsterdam and joins me on the line now. Stefan, tell us about the original idea and how these traffic control measures worked.
Well, the original idea was actually to make sure that there could be more people using the roads in Amsterdam. As you probably know, the city is crowded not only with cyclists, but also with cars, pedestrians, tourists. It's a very crowded city, and these so-called smart traffic lights had to to fluidify all the different flows in the streets, the narrow streets of the city. So the city council decided to start a small trial with the so-called smart traffic light that could be to give priority to either cyclists or to heavy lorries. Those were identified as causing the most congestion in the city of Amsterdam. Now, this small trial started a year ago on two crossroads in the city, but now the city council has decided to stop this test because apparently these traffic lights, as they are called, can collect personal data from people, including through apps on their smartphones that they're holding in their pockets or in their bags, without these people knowing that actually the traffic lights are collecting data. So that was a shock to the city council, and they decided to stop the test.
So that's it. It's completely gone now because of privacy concerns. So is there any plan to modify it or introduce a different way of controlling the traffic that doesn't raise the same concerns?
Well, not yet, actually. These traffic lights, only a couple of them have been installed, are able to be updated in the near future with software updates, which could imply that this new software would respect the rules by the Personal Data Authority in the Netherlands. Interestingly enough, Amsterdam is the only city that stopped using them, but in other cities around the Netherlands, there are still locations where cyclists actually can get green lights faster with an app. These traffic lights, smart traffic lights, also collect user data, raising similar privacy concerns, but apparently that is not a reason for those city councils in other parts of the country to stop the test. But Amsterdam apparently, has decided that this is a no-go, that the data of Amsterdam cyclists should be protected and should not be subject to possible hacking or abuse by hackers or other people who want to use this data without the cyclists actually knowing that they're giving their data away.
Stefan, thank you very much indeed. That's Stefan de Vries there talking to us from Amsterdam. It's time now to talk design with the writer, editor and consultant Samantha Say, who joins us from Paris. Samantha, good morning to you. Many thanks for coming on the show. Really exciting collaboration now between an English couture designer and a heritage French crystal brand. Tell us more.
Absolutely. It's absolutely exciting. So English couture designer Tamara Rolfe, who used to be part of the Rolfe and Russo partnership, and she's since gone solo. So she has partnered up with French heritage crystal brand Dôme Crystals, which has been around since the 1900s, to launch a series of vases and bowls inspired by the Art Nouveau movement that is so much a part of the crystal brand's history and aesthetics. So what is really great about this collaboration is that it's a good marriage of Ralph's signature elements. You know, you've got the pearls, the draping, beautiful soft feminine hues, and almost like a fairy tale like, sensual aesthetic that is rooted, of course, in the Art Nouveau movement. The collection has a lot of references to organic forms that are similar to, draped fabrics that you find in a couture house, asymmetrical curves and beautiful pearls adorning some of the metal crowns that are seen in the centerpieces. So I think that's definitely exciting. The collection is called The Poetic or The Poetique, and it will be launching on January 16th.
I've just had a look at it. It looks absolutely stunning. It really, really does. Now, there's a really interesting exhibition, which is very thought-provoking. It's the debut art installation of Harry Nureyev. But it's all about sort of sustainability, but it uses old cosmetics, as far as I can see.
It does. So Harry Nureyev has really been sort of known for his design work and his collaborations with, brands. And, of course, he's had a presence at Design Miami for years. What is really interesting about this is that this is sort of the first time that Harry is presenting himself as an artist. So this is his debut art installation in Paris. It's called Lettre Vitrine, which is going to be presented at the Galerie Sultana on Saturday, January 18th. It's an immersive installation, and it sort of looks into Nuriet's take on transformism, which is a new perspective on looking at everyday objects. This is sort of in line with a lot of things that he's done in the past, but this actually, he did a call out to friends, to family, to drop off, I guess, used products, everything from perfume bottles to bottles of shampoo that are, half used. And he transforms them into mini sculptures and exhibited in these little vitrines at the gallery. And, it's a really interesting way for us to look at, consumerism or hyper-consumerism, and kind of where we're at in the world with that. There's a lot of artifacts that are part of day-to-day life that we don't think about when we toss them out or when we don't finish using a bottle. And it all ends up as being this pile of consumption, this pile of pollution. And what's going to happen in the future in, say, 50 years time when all this is left and, we don't have great climate control. We don't have, we have pollution issues. So I think this is a really thought-provoking exhibition.
Absolutely. Now, how do you match the father of modern abstract sculpture and the skate parks of California in one person's work?
I absolutely love Rick Owens. I have loved him since the 90s when he was, exhibiting in LA. And, of course, I feel like a lot of his work is very autobiographical, whether it hits his fashion collections or his furniture collection. And, if you know anything about Rick, we all know that he's from California, and, the skate parks and the low-rise cars have always been a part of his lore, if you will. So what's really great is that he's actually going to be releasing a new furniture collection called Backstage. That's going to be in New York in the Salon de Fort Design. And this new furniture series is constructed from materials including plywood, marble, swamp wood, alongside classical elements, like plywood, white marble, and moose antlers.
I love the fact that he's channeling the Romanian sculpture, though, Constantin Brancusi.
Yes. And I think that's going to be really exciting to see how, I really loved sort of his abstract use of, not only just of materials, but of silhouette. So that's going to be really interesting to see. I haven't seen all of the work previewed yet, just a very small selection of it. And it's really exciting. I always find his work to be so exciting, so different from everything else I've seen. Now, Backstage will also introduce the Tech Glade, which is an evolution of this modular glade structure that he developed in collaboration with Travis Scott for the backstage area of his recent show called the Circus Maximus, which was a world tour that spanned, I think it was on the road for over a year. And this expands the 10-piece modular design, which includes large screen TVs, a recording studio, a cocoon-like sofa, and, it's all going to be displayed under this gorgeous canopy.
Sounds excellent. Yeah. And it opens on the 10th of January, Samantha Say there. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks very much to our producers Hassan Anderson and Tom Webb, our researcher Maisie Ringer, and our studio manager Lily Austin. The briefing is up at midday London time, and the Globalists will be back at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening.